Hello, everybody. Oh, I've got the dreaded mosquito fly artifacts. Let me just get rid of that. That should do it. Hopefully. There we go, more or less. Right. Nothing like organization, is it? Well, this is nothing like organization. So welcome everybody to this sort of little bonus stream on a Sunday. Just thought I'd do another build video stream, whatever you want to call it. Those of you who are in the members Discord, there is a link if you want to come and join me. You want to come and show what's on your bench and build along with me. I'm more than welcome. You are more than welcome, and I'm more than happy to host you. I understand it's not for everybody. A lot of people don't like the publicity, the attention. But if you want to do that, please do hop on. So I'm going to be building a couple of things. I say a couple of things because one of them is extraordinarily easy. Pablo just got something, some random thing somewhere. First of which is this. Obviously, painting the Imperial Japanese Navy Air Force, I need a couple of paint mules. I have an old airfix 0 here, and I've got this Hobby Boss 0, which is just an easy assembly authentic kit. It's very, very simple. So we'll have a look at that in a second. So I'm going to be building that, which probably won't take very long at all. And then I'm probably going to start the Sally as well, the ICM kit in 72nd scale. Again, kind of as a bit of a paint mule for the IGN colors video. So yeah, let's crack on. Let me transfer you across to the other screen. I'll sort Pablo out in a second. Don't worry. And let's get the camera. Apologies for that. Changing the camera crashed the studio. So we're back now. So yeah, here's the Zero Fighter Type 52. And as you can see, it is a very, very basic kit in terms of its build. So it's basically the wing assembly, the cockpit assembly, and the body assembly just go together. You put the cannons in, you've got the wings on, and you have the engine and cowling. So very, very simple in terms of assembly. I won't go beyond that. I'm not going to do the undercarriage and stuff because that's not really useful for us because we're only demonstrating the paints. So, and obviously won't be using decals. So these are really neat kits for younger modelers, for beginners. In the kind of same vein as the airfix starter kits. If I can get it out of this protective vac, I've got this vac formed insert which holds everything very securely. So, although it's not actually too difficult to get it out. So these wings are molded solid, but feature a reasonable amount of detail. So, if you are just starting out, or if you're a youngster who wants to have a go you know, doing some modeling, not too confident in your abilities, just want to get on to, you know, painting stuff up quickly. I mean, these very simple joining points. You see, I'm not filling fully, but you can see it all kind of just clips together. Sorry, 1 second. I'm just trying to get Pablo to come over. Yeah. They have these very limited frames for the rest of it. So these Hobby Boss, what are they called? Easy assembly kits. Pretty neat for what they are. You know, again, I think as a starting point for somebody getting into the hobby, you know, who is less interested in the construction, more interested in the painting, these are pretty good. You know, considering the amount of detail that that they represent, I think equivalent to something like an airfix starter kit. But we'll have a look at that in a little bit. So that shouldn't take us long at all. The ICM Sally, a little bit more involved. I mean, a lot more involved, obviously. Now, I think possibly do we need some more light here? Let's see what we can do about that. There we go. So this piece, see, it just has 4 locating pins, which just go on these ones here, like so. And this comes in on top of that. Basically, a big one goes in there. And then that closes all of that up. So, you know, pretty impressive. You know? So before I join all of that up, come on, let go. Though I didn't want to push it too much. Then out. I will paint the interior for what it is. Little piece there. We can go ahead and get these pieces off. So, as always, if you guys have anything you want to comment on or question, just QQQ, CCC, or question or comment in capitals. Just helps me pull it out of the chat. A bit tricky painting pre-molded cockpits. Well, I mean, I don't think it's going to be that tricky. I mean, I'm not going to use an airbrush here. I mean, using an airbrush should be very simple. It's, you know, it's very much simplified, you know, because obviously this is limited by injection molding. So, you know, it's hollow in the bottom, but otherwise it's a single piece, sort of almost like a plunge casting you'd get on back form, because obviously they have considerations of that. But we'll paint that in a second. Those pieces, I'm just cutting off the pieces that it's obvious what they are and where they go. The cannons, yeah, I think we can cut those as well because they are handed. I don't want to cut off anything that isn't immediately apparent. Are those different? Okay, the joining pieces are different, so we can identify those. So I think basically we can take almost everything we need off the frames before we then get into assembly. Yeah, like so. So I've got this 0. It's just the airfix 0. Oh, I've just broken a piece off there. Not that really matters. Because I say it is just a paint mule. And this is painted in this sort of light grey green, which has sort of persisted as this idea that zeros were white or light grey. I'll show you the colour that I'm going to mix for that. Oh, that's actually not glued in, or not glued in. No, neither of those seem to be glued in. Let's quickly remedy that. That was an easy one. What paints will I be using? I will be using ICM paints, as always. Am I mixing? We are quite a bit further down the road with, I say we, I'm using the royal we. Casey has got a lot more of the Tamiya paints, of the spectral data on them. So I think we're up to 70, XF70, which is great. Because obviously once all the Tamiya paints are in, I can also do similar videos for the Tamiya paints, which I think, Tamiya paints are a little bit more accessible for a either a spray painting or an international audience. You can get Tamiya paints pretty much anywhere in the world, and obviously if you're spray painting with Tamiya paints is really nice, really easy. So I think it'd be good to have those two. If you're hand painting, I would always recommend ICM over Tamiya. Not that you can't paint with Tamiya. It's just Tamiya paints, because they are or have a lot of alcohol in their formulation and alcohol derivatives, they tend to skin quickly when you're painting. So it's difficult, unless you're using extender, to brush paint with them if you're not used to them. Let's put it that way. Now, the other thing with Tamiya paints is they don't have quite the same color gamut range. So they're more limited in pigments. They tend to obviously look up more specifically military colors, whereas the ICM paints are a little bit more all-encompassing. Right. Put those aside for a second. I'm looking for a couple of things I don't see here. One of those is some glasses, and the other of which is a couple of paintbrushes that I'm looking for. What's that? One, but I need the other two. So bear with me 1 second. Okay, glasses found. That was easy. Not so much the others, but never mind. So first of all, let's get that cockpit painted. So I'm going to be mixing Mitsubishi Interior Green first, which is a fairly easy mix, actually. Pablo, what are you doing? Causing chaos. Settle down in your bed. That's a good boy. Okay, now I can't find the right Tamiya paints. Oh, there's nothing like being organized. As I mentioned before, this is nothing like being organized. Okay, let's get my Tamiya tribute build out of the way. So I mentioned this on a couple of streams. This is my custom ICM paint rack. This is the prototype version. I made some adjustments after designing the first one, so I've got these supports here, and then originally I had one in the center, and actually I've changed it so they're every two, so you've got, you know, two supports between each four paints, which makes it a lot more sturdy rather than this, which is, I mean, it's fine. I'm not going to give it too much abuse, but I will have these on sale in the shop shortly. It gives you all 80 paints there. You know, they are held in place nicely without being, you know, too firm, and I've designed it so that the level of this still allows you to see the top of the bottle, because although you can see these, you know, it's also sometimes quite nice just to see the actual paint bottle itself. So let's get 1062 and 1064. So Mitsubishi Interior Green. So the Japanese Navy used standard grey-green for their internal components. But Pablo, what are you doing? Come on, in your bed. Goodness me. Yeah, used a standard grey-green, but manufacturers, how they interpreted directions, as with a lot of nations, left a lot to be desired. That is a good question, We're Crazy. They do sell individual paint pots. I have them on the website. So if you head over to mansmodelmoments.com, of course, that's only really useful if you're in the UK. Outside of the UK, I'm not sure. I'm not sure who. I know Squadron in the US supply ICM paints. I don't know what they have in terms of individuals. Now, one thing should be said: this camera does not register colors as they appear in reality. So, see, this color here looks a lot more brown than it actually is in reality. So this is actually quite a green, grey-green. So the IGN official color was actually not that far off RAF Interior Green, whereas the Mitsubishi color was a lot greener, a bit more like the US Interior Green, in fact. So yeah, these pre-molded ones, I mean, I'm only really doing this to show the color, so I'm not bothered about picking out the individual pieces like the rudder pedals and the control stick. Although, to be honest, it wouldn't be difficult here. Interestingly, most Japanese aircraft didn't have separately colored instrument panels. They tended to be just finished in the interior color. There we go. That there. If you're in Australia, yeah, I'm not sure what the situation is with regard to supply of ICM paints. I don't know that there is an official importer. Okay, that's one coat. Leave that for the time being. And of course, I don't have any water here to wash my brush out. So again, excuse me 1 second. Okay, nice cup of dirty water there. Now I've actually washed the brush out in it. In your bed. Come on, settle down. Right. Meanwhile, look at this beast. So, early Zeros, they actually did a test, a camouflage test with the Zero to find out what color they should camouflage it. And color they that was used with Zeros before they started camouflaging them was an overall color, but it's been termed a Miro. The actual Japanese kind of translation of what the color was for Zeros in service, which seems to have been only applied to Zeros, was J3 ash gray tending towards or leaning towards candy color. And candy in Japanese, it also means like amber color. Now, interestingly, the J3 ash gray was kind of a warm gray, and then the leaning towards candy color makes it a little bit warmer, more orange. But actually, in mixing the color, it's the same base as the J3 with orange added, so it kind of makes sense. Like when I got the LAB values and then put the mixing in, and the mixes came out that way, it's like, well, that kind of does make sense, you know, that it would be basically the same color, just adjusted towards that candy color. The cowlings were not black; they were color Q1, which is a blue-black, which faded really badly. It was not very resistant in the environments that it was worked in, and it faded to almost like a blue-gray color. And you can see examples of that in historical photos, especially crashed zeros, where they've been then just abandoned and left to the environment, and they look dreadful. So it remains very controversial, this whole topic. But I've spoken with a chap called Nicholas Millman, who's a published author on this subject, and taken advice from him. So don't shoot the messenger. This is as good a research as I can find. If you've got different opinions, that's fine. But this is what I've gone with. Are you doing any other storage items? Yeah, I probably would, depending on demand, depending on what people want. You know, I have a laser cutter and I'm prepared to use it, so why not? Just going to add a little water to this just to stop it drying out in my little mixing cup here. Let's see. Yeah, so the first things I do will probably be like some stands for Tamiya extra thin and retarder, and then maybe some ones for paints and bits. I'll probably start small on little ones for using on your bench rather than like entire racks, because like having an entire rack for your Tamiya paints is a bit big. Perhaps not something that people want immediately. But if you've got any thoughts about what you would like, what you're looking for, let me know. Okay. So let's do some Amiro. And for Amiro, we're going to use... Well, actually, let's do some Aotaki first. Which is easy. Yeah, I need some of that too. And also 29.35. 29.35. So let me show you first what the J3 looks like. It's really nice and easy. So the official Camouflage, when it was finally announced, was D1 over J3, which is deep green black over ash gray. This is the ash gray. So just to give you the comparison between how this is painted, this is Humboldt's recommended, or airfix's recommended Humboldt paint, which is way too green compared to ash gray. I'll probably just paint over these. Now this is again another reason that I like the ICM paints, is because they have really good coverage. very high pigment density. So you can see the difference here between the, I don't know what the Humbrol recommended color is, and J3. You can see how green the Humbrol color is compared to the ash gray. Quite different. And then Amiro, and as a side note on Japanese colors, anything ending in iro, I-R-O, or shoku, basically means color. So it forms no real part of the actual color itself. It just means color, like ash gray color. So there we have the ash gray again. I'll mix it with the other. And then we're just going to add some clear orange to the mix. These clear paints from ICM are really good for changing an existing color, so they're really good for mixing. Let's have some water in there. As you'll see here, because they just subtly change the color. Which you'll see when I'm putting this on. You'll see a couple of things. One is how it compares to the J3, but also how it compares to the Humbrol recommendation. Obviously, I'll do a couple of coats because I've just thinned that a little bit. Obviously, they have to dry. The color will change as it dries. But straight away, you can see. So it's sort of more of a hemp color. But you can see how it's still kind of the same lightness value, and why it would be described as J3 going towards a candy color. So it fits with the historical description. Hopefully, when it's all over in this color, you'll see kind of does look right. So yeah, Japanese colors are a bit of a minefield. I do go into that in a little bit of, not a huge depth, but just to give people a background and an understanding of why the subject is so contentious, and that really relying on your references becomes even more important when you're looking at Japanese subjects. let's just let that dry a little. Actually, yeah, no, I'll keep that. Now the other very contentious colour, or contentious so much as the one that's talked a lot about in for Japanese subjects, Aotaki, which is a clear lacquer over a metal finish. And the best way to represent that is to create a clear paint and use that over an aluminium base or a silver base. So here I've got 1 part of clear orange, and 2 parts of clear blue, and then I'm actually going to mix it with 3 parts of gloss varnish. So the Japanese actually used the sap from, or a lacquer derived from the sap of the Chinese lacquer tree for their primers. They considered it better than things like zinc chromate used in the West. As you see, this creates a lovely color, sort of blue-green, sort of turquoise color, which if you, let me just get another, get a metal surface here and just paint some on. Ideally, you want to be using the largest brush you have for this sort of thing, not this tiddly little thing that leaves a lot of brush marks and deposition here. But if we leave that to dry, then you'll see it will be this blue-green color with the reflectivity of the metal underneath, which makes it look that metallic, shiny blue-green color. And the appearance of this, so firstly, the pigments used for this were not set. So different manufacturers, different interpretations of this were used. So what pigments were used in this varied. I believe even black versions have been found. Just want to do another side, because the other thing is the number of coats changed how it appeared. You know, how it was applied, whether it was sprayed or hand painted, you know, how thickly it was applied. All of these had an effect on the final look of it. Now, because of that, I think this kind of clear painting over a metallic base gives you that look far more than if you painted a metallic color, which looks like, you know, someone who used car paint. And the principal reason for that is because metallic paints have achieved their metal look by using typically mica flakes in them. And mica flakes are quite large compared to our scale. So they're always going to look a bit funky, a little bit glitter-like. So some companies and the more expensive metal paints actually use metal flakes, which can be much smaller and finer, more uniform, and they look better. But even so, you're not going to get the same kind of look as if you're just using, as the Japanese did for the actual aircraft, a clear paint, clear lacquer over a metallic surface. I'm just giving a second coat on this interior. Not by any means perfect, but it will give the impression that we want. That's all. Just want to indicate the color rather than anything else. This isn't a finished model. It's not going to be for display or anything. So let's do a second coat here so you can get the appreciation of what color it's actually supposed to be. You're still seeing a lot of the Humbrol green gray through that. So hopefully you can see now some of the difference. I mean, this again still needs a second coat, but you can see it's a much more neutral gray while still having a slight tint to it, which some people perceive as green. Some people perceive as slightly blue, but not like this, right? And then this is obviously quite a lot more tinted towards that amber color. Now, on black and white, in contrast to the cowling, this just comes out as pale gray or white even. And some of that is why you've got some of these myths of white Japanese Zeros, Pearl Harbor and things. Okay, so that's basically dry there. So you can see, depending on how thick we've gone, this again, the cameras are going to capture this wonderfully well. You can basically see this looks a lot bluer than this. You got the thick. Now, the great thing about this, using the blue and the orange, is that you can change the ratios. So if you think, yeah, I think this is a bit too green for the demonstrate, the example, the aircraft that I want to represent, because there are artifacts and you do find them with everything from very green to very blue. So it's like, okay, well, I want to adjust it. So I'm going to put a bit more blue in there. Now, the only thing is, I would recommend adding, for every volume of paint you add, also add one of varnish, because again, you want to recreate the look of a clear lacquer rather than a clear paint, Plus, if you can thin this further and then do multiple coats and build that up. That's better than going, with a very thick, heavy coat to start with. So hopefully you can see that is more blue. more blue sheen. When it dries, you'll be able to see a little bit more. But we're still preserving because of the gloss varnish, you know, it looks like a lacquer. Because it was. You know, and you can, let me just take some, mix it in a little bit here at the edge, just to get a really blue version. So you can go with whatever you like. The varnish also acts a little bit like a retarder, so it helps it to level a little bit. But again, if you thin this with water, that would also help with that effect too. Again, this is just a very rough demo for you guys. So Mark, this will be a video. So all of the mixtures and everything, I will set a bundle together in the shop for this. So, but for the Aotaki, clear blue, clear orange, 2-to-1, 2 blue to 1 orange, and then add that with an equal mixture of gloss varnish. You could use Tamiya colors as well. I haven't tried the Tamiya. Obviously, they don't do an orange, so I'll have to have a look. So if you're doing yellow, that'll create a much stronger green. One of the things about this, and one of the reasons so a 1-to-1 of this produces a green. So you're going to have to add a lot more blue if you're using Tamiya and then using like a yellow, or I mean, you can use the green, you know, blue and green together. And one of the things I also saw, so Aotaki was used in all of the interior of, like, much like if you think of how the Americans use zinc chromate as a primer for interior pieces of the aircraft, that's how Aotaki was used in Japanese aircraft. Now, because Japanese aircraft were produced, it was highly distributed, the production, because obviously they're an island nation, lots of places all over the place making sub-assemblies. They were primed. Each section tends to have been primed and then passed to the next piece of the production assembly. So you'd have things that would, and sometimes those pieces would be put together and then the whole thing primed again, you know, so that you would have different shades of, you know, different numbers of coatings of Aotaki. So you can see there we've got quite a greenish blue, a turquoise, a much more blue version, and a very blue version where I've mixed in that, that more blue. Yeah, those are all pretty much dry now. So as I say, I wouldn't apply it with this kind of, this is not a suitable brush for doing area painting with something like this. And I'd probably thin it down, obviously, before actually painting to get a much more even distribution. But actually, if you look at some of it, it wasn't necessarily very evenly applied, and you did get build up, you know, in corners of stuff and things. So this allows you to reproduce that quite accurately, you know, or to produce that effect quite accurately. So there we go. Question: is it safe to put Mr. Surface of 500 over the top of Vallejo plastic putty? Ooh, now, not sure. You mean when it's dry? Yeah, as in just as a gap filler, like Vallejo plastic putty in the gap, it's dried, then yeah, Mr. Surface would be fine over that. But I'll caveat that with always test on on something that you don't care about before actually doing something you do care about. Because I don't want to be responsible for destroying a model. Like, Alex said it, this bastard. So whilst I've got my Aotaki here, I'm going to quickly do these wheel wells. Oh, bugger. Made a mistake. Because I haven't done them aluminium yet. Foolish child, Alex. I just need to get some tissue. Okay, so obviously this effect does require that you spray or paint a silver color over the area first. Otherwise, it's just going to look weird. Look like plastic with blue paint on it, because that's exactly what it will be. I must say the detail on these easy assembly kits is pretty damn good. You've got like rivet detail, like recessed rivet detail, got all the panel lining, got fabric effect on the ailerons there. It's not bad. Not bad at all. And I think the good thing about these sorts of things is they enable, somebody who's just coming into the hobby, or if you want, quick, say you want a quick mojo build. I just want to do a zero. I've seen this particular example. I want to do the paint scheme on it because it's really cool. Well, it doesn't have to be a zero. It can be anything, obviously. But it allows you to just slam the thing together and get to that bit that you're interested in at that time. There's nothing wrong with that. You don't have to be interested in every particular aspect of every model that you do. It doesn't have to be an involved construction project or, the most weathered aircraft ever or anything like that. It can be whatever you want it to be. Right. Now, I'm going to spray this aluminium. I should be back in 2 shakes of a lamb's what's-it. And there we go. So that should dry pretty quickly. Give it a bit of airflow just to speed that up. There we go. Yeah, I wouldn't have to start with. When I saw your question, I was imagining camouflage putty, the stuff that you use to create camouflage lines on aircraft, and I think that would not work well. Let's put it that way. I think that would probably be a mistake. Right, let's just clean these pallets out. So Aotaki tends not to have been used in crew areas. Again, much like zinc chromate in the United States, it was a primer. And obviously, especially the Navy aircraft had to be primed because they were operating obviously in pretty aggressive conditions environmentally. So, a lot of sun, so a lot of UV, a lot of salt water, so corrosion. So having some sort of protection on the aircraft, which, bear in mind, Japan was not awash and still isn't awash with mineral resources. So there was an emphasis in Japanese military doctrine on longevity. Well, actually, in a lot of Japanese culture, but especially for the Japanese military, Zero had an incredible range, considering the its size and everything. But I mean, it also had a huge amount of drawbacks. It's incredibly maneuverable. Beginning of the war, completely outclassed things like the Wildcat. But of course, it didn't even have self-sealing fuel tanks at the beginning, so which is why they exploded when you shot them. So the swings and roundabouts. Great thing about rattle can is it dries so quickly. What have I just done with that paintbrush now? Ooh. Let's just add some water to this. There we go. So yeah, metallics are one of those things that I probably need to talk about in a completely separate video. But I think having a clear coat, a transparent paint over metallic here is going to be by far the most accurate looking impression for Aotaki rather than a metallic paint. Many manufacturers do metallic paints, but I really don't think they give the right look, principally because they're completely even, right? Apart from the aforementioned sparkly factor, which of course you don't really get in spray paints because they are much finer, because obviously got to spray through a nozzle. You don't want big chunks getting up. So I mean, this is an automotive spray, which I always prefer for natural metal finishes. There's no mica flake look here because there's no mica in it. You wouldn't get mica through a spray nozzle like that. So that is our Aotaki. So you'll get a denser color in the recesses here than you will across the main part, which allows more of that metal to come through. Whereas a metallic paint would cover all of this evenly. So I think it not only looks more effective, it also gives you some depth. Right, let's clean that out. As I mentioned, anybody that's on the members Discord, if you want to join me here, you want to bring whatever's on your bench and put it up. If you've got a webcam, you're more than welcome to join me. Obviously, without a webcam, it makes it a little bit difficult because nobody can see. So yeah, in a lot of cases, that distributed production of aircraft can be quite useful historically. I think it was, I can't remember which way round it was. I think it was Mitsubishi painted the line from, for the top and bottom fuselage color, they painted it as a curve from the rear stabilizer down to here. Whereas it was either Mitsubishi and Nakajima were the main producers, right? Nakajima just did it as a straight line, basically across from the back to the wing root or the wing trailing edge. So just looking at a machine and how it's finished, you can see where it was produced, which is quite handy from a historical point of view. More for restorers and things, I guess, but and then they did tend to use, although again, much like many nations in World War II, there were standards, and then there were what the companies did. And I was a bit surprised when I started going down this rabbit hole about how varied Japanese producers were, because I work for a Japanese company. They are very rigorous, very into production quality and standards, and seeing the amount of variation and lack of records in some of how Japan operated during World War II is just like almost like looking at a different nation. So I'm just going to pop that little cockpit insert in. Okay, fairly happy with that. So I don't think you need cement on these. I think they're just meant to clip together like that. And obviously you can put cement on them as well. Got paint on my fingers. There we go. It's quite a nice fit, considering that it's just there's not much of a gap there, considering it's just a press fit. It's not a bad wing to fuselage root join on that one. We will, of course, run some cement in there as well. Because we're not about half measures here, are we? Let's we're going to do it. We're going to do it permanently. I could really do with clamping, but because this is just a paint mule, I'm just going to hold it and we'll see where we go. Oh, I know, Steve, spoiling. I think you heard you say you do not use Aotaki for crew areas. So what do you paint cockpits? So it depends. Imperial Japanese Navy aircraft, they did have a M1 grey green was the standard color. It was sometimes used in cockpits as well, I believe. If you have a Mitsubishi produced aircraft, they had an interpretation of interior green. Nakajima had a slightly different interpretation of interior green, or at least cockpits from those aircraft seem to be consistently degraded in the same way. So Mitsubishi's was substantially more green than the standard. Nakajima's was darker, as their colors seem to be a bit darker and bluer almost. And then the Army used completely different colors, of course. So the standard Army color was actually it was called ash indigo color, and it's kind of a dark drab gray. And I think some of the US reports afterwards saying, being in some of their bombers, saying it was like a very depressing experience being with almost like darkness. But they also, and again, this changed towards the end of the war as well. They did try to standardize their colors between the Army and Navy, much as the US did. In a lot of ways, it's interesting to see the parallels between Japan and America going through the war, or well, pre to going through and at the end of the war, because there are quite a few parallels and a lot of differences as well. But it's interesting to see, two nations with very different cultures, very different approaches, very different philosophies have, and obviously being antagonists, opponents in the war, having quite similar, um, what do you call it, really? Just similar ways of things happening, whether it's human nature or, the pressures of war. You look at, I started off here with the RAF mixing paints, and my God, the RAF look the epitome of organization and standardization by comparison to basically everybody else I've looked at. Even more so than the Germans, which is astonishing, really. Although the Germans were extremely ordered, they also had, the same interpretations, of things. They were also pressed with shortages, as was everybody, in that period. But yeah, the Japanese, that really surprised me about how almost mythical some of these colors have become. And because they were operating in harsh environments, the artifacts we have darkened. They also did what they call chalked. So it's basically where the binder degrades and you get titanium dioxide rising to the top of the paint finish, which makes it look a lot lighter than the actual paint color that it was originally specified with or actually coated in. So there's a whole bunch of these factors that make it really difficult. You would have to do some pretty extensive destructive testing of the paint to try and work out what the original pigments and binders were, and then basically try and recreate those to see how it would have looked. And nobody's ever done that as far as I can see. So trying to deem the accuracy of some of these 80-year-old paint chips, it's just like, well, how can you tell how that paint has changed in 80 years? And were the paint chips the actual paint? Because quite often they were just indicative to indicate the color to a manufacturer. This is the color we want you to make stuff. It wasn't a recipe. It was just, look, this is the color. So yeah, they also used something called number 7 Oryaku Nanu Goshuku, which was a sort of kind of olivey drab color in those aircraft, and Kimidori Iro. So, which, again, these sort of greenish colors. So it was a bit of a mess. So really, my advice is look at what type of aircraft. So it does seem to change often with the type of aircraft, where it was made. It goes down to that. So if you've got information on an individual aircraft, go with that. And then, like, if you can't get that, look at the type of aircraft and where it was produced, and go with that. If you can't go with that, then go with the type of aircraft generally. So it's this iterative process of trying to work out exactly what the colors were for an individual aircraft. Okay, no worries. And thanks for joining Down Under. So yeah, as with any of my videos on paint mixing, the number one piece of advice is check your references, do your own research, decide what you believe is correct. I can give you some information. I can only give you the information that is current or understood to be true at the time, or based on the most accurate piece of reference we got. I can mix pretty accurate colors to pretty much any standard. But as always, it is, well, what are you mixing to? If your numbers for the standard are wrong, then what you're mixing is going to be wrong. So the reference part, the research part, is the most important piece of the equation, which is kind of obvious, but also much overlooked, I feel. Okay, I'm just cracking on with this easy build, which I believe that's the wrong one. It goes in this side. It's nice that they've got different sized tabs. They go in very nicely and at the right angle. That is better than the airfix kit, the way that those fit in there, I have to say. Because if you saw when I was gluing those in a few minutes ago, I had to really carefully set the angle of those. These ones, they're just there. So, yeah. Interestingly, they're quite different, aren't they? There's their wings. I mean, obviously different models of Zero, and I don't know the Zero well at all, so I can't say one is correct and one is not. So spinners and props sometimes were natural metal, sometimes were painted in Azuki bean. I do think it's quite interesting the way the Japanese, a lot of the names of their paints and stuff refer to very natural things. Like Aotaki is fresh bamboo, new bamboo. The Japanese didn't distinguish between blue and green in the way that we do in the West in World War II, or historically. And one thing Fenris Models actually said to me the other day was that if you go to Japan, they even look at the stoplights, and a lot of them are distinctly blue rather than green. So yeah, Japanese traditionally have not distinguished blue and green in the way that the West has. AO basically refers to the that whole part of the electromagnetic spectrum, the blue-green area. So, in fact, let me. Do I have it? Yes, I do. So let me present this. Share screen. Let me do. Green tab. No. Just seeing how I can do this for you here. Okay, I'm going to show you my second screen. And then I'm going to pull this over. Oh, I can't do that. Hang on a minute. Let me. I think I need to do this first. Okay, now I can. Right. So if you see here, this this spectrum, basically the Japanese look at everything from kind of here, so from about 520 nanometers up, down, and that is AO, right? And then refer to like different parts of this by referencing, you know, other things, other natural things. So, like I said, like bamboo. So if you know what the color of blue bamboo, of new bamboo looks like, then you know what color they were going for. Now, if you separate out Aotaki as kanji, then you get blue bamboo. So, because Japanese is a contextual language, you know, transliteration doesn't necessarily work. And because of that, and because a lot of researchers, you know, post World War II have been Western and not Japanese, not natural Japanese speakers, there's been a lot of mistranslation and muddying of the waters, I guess, would be the best way to put it. Whoops. Dropping the spinner there. I mean, these gun barrels are pretty fine. It's not bad. Now there it is. I say there was a back plate. It goes on there. Like so. To which the engine goes on. Although that needs, it's got quite a big piece of flash on there, which is stopping it actually going in. Let's get rid of that. I say I'm not hugely concerned about the individual elements here, as this is just a paint mule. And then the cowling goes over all of that, like so. Yeah, I'm not as keen on that as the airfix one. But hey, let's pop it on anyway. As I said, it's only a paint mule. That, though, is a bit skewed. We don't want that. It's actually getting skewed as I put the cowling on, I think. Ah, I'll tell you, that's because this piece isn't glued on. Oh dear, it's usually user error, isn't it? So I'm going to call the stream Don't Do What I Do. It's kind of a warning stream. How not to model. What is stopping that going on? Okay, there we go. That's better. That's better. Just give it a little touch of cement in there. Get that. Yeah, much larger cowling, obviously on the later Zero. Let's take that off now. Okay. Hi, Howard. So I'm just throwing together a Hobby Boss Zero, just one of the quick build ones, easy build, whatever they call it, just as a paint mule for my IGN colors. So we've just been talking about Japanese colors, Aotaki, Emiro, ash gray, all those good things. So with that, actually, I'm going to go ahead and get a decent amount of Emiro made up. Now that's what I was looking for my other brushes for, because I have some larger brushes around here. You see, this is RLMO2. So you can see RLMO2, ash gray, Miro, they're all on the same sort of spectrum, but all quite different as well. Yeah, I cannot find that other brush. Oh, well. We'll just go with this then. Nice big blob of grey-green. So obviously if I was doing this properly, I would be measuring these a little bit more accurately than I am. The water just to give me some fluidity. We can get that mixed up. Here we go. The Miro was the all-over color used for Zeros, and shouldn't be confused with the army color that was used all over on early war stuff, which was Haryakushuku, which is basically like a light ash gray. The Japanese were also incredibly confusing because they called a lot of things very, very similar colors, which is, again, made the whole historical part of it more difficult. So, for instance, they had a couple of colors, D1 and D2 in the Navy, this is. D1 is deep green black, and D2 is green black. Now, from that description, which of those do you think is darker? Do you think it's the deep green black or the green black? Doesn't really tell you, does it? And they're very similar names, so it's just like, doesn't really give you any pointers. So people have been researching this obviously for a long time. It must be a nightmare, you know, trying to find out what some of these things were. Of course, then you have the whole what was actually applied to the aircraft rather than what they were told to apply to the aircraft. Wartime shortages, you know, all of those usual things. But very, very different from this Humbrol color, which is again why I did the video on the most accurate colors and why you guys really well, and also the one about painting by numbers. You know, you cannot trust manufacturers on their paint recommendations and colors. They're not independent. They have a vested interest in, you know, telling you to use their paints. You know, it's all in one, blah blah blah. I think it's very rarely the best choice. I think you should really choose colors based on their properties, a paint range, you know, based on their properties and how you're applying them rather than by who manufactures them. So given that you've watched the football, Howard, who won? I don't even know who Newcastle were playing, so I was a draw. The worst type of game. I appreciate sometimes it's the fairest outcome, but deeply unsatisfying from a psychological point of view. Bournemouth. Ah. Okay, I haven't mixed enough. That's fine because I've got to do another coat on much of this anyway. If I can stretch this last little bit so at least I can get a covering on this hideous green, like RAF Sky. There we go. Coat one done. No worries, Craig. There'll always be another time. I'm looking forward to the rest of my curry this evening. As I mentioned, I had friends over last night, so I didn't want to have a curry before they came. I thought that would be a bit antisocial. So I had lovely soup instead. Tomato soup with quite a lot of cheese and some nice bread. See, you can see there, you've got 3 different finishes of Aotaki there. And funnily enough, let me show you an example of exactly that. There is well, if I can get the site. There's a site called Emma's Plains, and fortunately the server for it just seems to be dreadful. There's quite a lot of errors on the information on there, but there's quite a lot of good stuff as well. Yeah, let me show you this screen. So that is some Aotaki from samples. So it goes from very green and quite light, on these pieces which have only been coated once, right, to this, where obviously this piece has been put on another assembly, and then that assembly has all been primed, and where it's been bolted to the other piece has been obscured from that, and this seems to be a thicker coating. So that piece that I said about pieces being coated with Aotaki and then assembled and then coated again. So these are compressed oxygen bottle bracket straps. So not exactly the most critical part of an aircraft. Yeah, see, this site doesn't often work. Which is a shame. But there are a few sites. There's this called jaircraft.com. But the one that I would recommend probably most is Aviation of Japan. This is Nicholas Millman's blog. It's not very easy to navigate because it's in blog format. He does have a search function, but yeah, you have to kind of know what you're looking for with the search function. Otherwise, you could go through and read it, but of course, you see here there are hundreds of articles. So there's a lot of research here. This goes back to 2008, but there's so much good information here. So it's a vexed question of Imperial Japanese Navy Browns. Yeah, so lots of stuff here. But let's see, has the Emma's Plains? Some of it's loaded. Let's see if this will open a new tab. No, you see, you sometimes get this error. But I think that picture, is quite a good one. There's a better one than this, which I was hoping to show you guys. It doesn't look like I'm going to be able to get them. I don't know why it does this. No, shame because this is the one I really want to show you, the Aotaki variations one. No, sometimes it just doesn't work. So unfortunate, but that's the way it goes. Let's just see if I can find another picture to show you guys. Here we go. So this might not load in the actual, if I click on it, because it's going to take me to Emma's planes. Yep, that's not going to do it. But you can see from here, like the variation here, right? From this deep dark green to this light, turquoise blue, and kind of every iteration between. So this also here, see this one? Look how blue that is. Brilliant blue. That is pretty much clear blue by itself. So there's, don't sweat it too much, because like with most wartime primers, the exact color wasn't important. The important thing was that it was primed. The pigment really just showed we've put a coat of lacquer on this, right? The pigment wasn't the actual important piece. It was the lacquer, the protective lacquer, which was doing the job. And the color was really to show like this piece has been primed, which may also explain why there were so, the different colors were mixed, even in the same production factory, because maybe they wanted to show that, yeah, this has been primed, but then they primed it like different pieces or different stage of the assembly, used a slightly different shade, maybe a little bit more pigment or a bit of different pigment in there, just to show, hey, look, now we've primed, are these pieces primed or not? And it's like, well, they've had the first stage priming, but these pieces haven't, which is important if you think, if your factory's under threat of aerial attack and you've got to pack everything up and go to shelter, then come back to know where you are in the production process. So you can kind of get it from a human perspective of why these things happened. And people, I think, get a lot of hang-ups on, what is the exact shade? It's like, well, there wasn't an exact shade. There were all kinds of different ones. You can be representative, and say, well, okay, this one's going to be a bluish one, right? Or you could then look at that and think, well, actually, given those historical examples, I'm not sure that is like dark enough. I'm going to give it another coat, which is why, again, I suggest that you do it equally with gloss varnish, because it was a lacquer, so it was a shiny finish, and then you can do multiple coats and build up the effect that you want. So, oh, Howard, big step. About to prime my Tornado for Desert Pink. Prime dark or light for this? Ideally, I would like to mottle this, so typically dark then light, but I also want to pre-shade for panel lines. You could do it either way, to be honest, Howard. I don't think it really makes much difference which way you're going to do the priming if you're then going to do mottle and pre-shade. I would typically go neutral. So I would go with obviously I use Aotaki, so I'd use an Aotaki grey primer because it's a nice neutral color. Because it's a good base, and then I can do both shade and highlight on top of that if I'm going to do pre-shading. So, I go for the mid-tone, which also then has the least effect on the colors, because I prime black, which I tend to do for armor. I'm using that black for the deep shadows, so I can put light coats on, gives the impression of shadow, and then build up from that. Whereas if I'm doing aircraft, I typically go neutral, and then I can shade panel lines. I can do like mottle in different shades on top, and then I can apply my color. And I've only got light and dark. I don't have, I'm not fighting like a dark base, if you like. You can use all sorts. So you can mottle dark grey. You can mottle in light as well. So you can go both ways if you've got a neutral grey. So you can add in a little bit of white to get, some depth and textural variation there. Depends how much work you want to put into it, really. Yes, Mr. Surfacer do indeed do a pink primer in 1500. Outlaw do a pink primer as well. Moss has quite a lot of that. And I've actually found it better than Mr. Surfacer pink for most colors. Yeah, right. Anyway. I think this is just about dry. Yep. So I can give. So the other thing when you're mixing and hand painting with acrylics, now normally I would never paint again with this size brush on this because you can see all the brush strokes and stuff here. Obviously I can do a second coat which will cover up much of that, but I would use probably a centimeter wide flat brush. I would brush in the direction of airflow across the aircraft. That would be my final stroke. Even if I was like blocking in color vertically, I would then go along and go over it while it's still wet in the direction of airflow. So if I am getting any streaking, it adds to that impression of any weathered airflow kind of thing. But if you are going to, if you only got that brush, right, it's still possible to create a nice finish. The trick is to thin your paint and do multiple coats. It's a bit more laborious. I do it in the Mary Rose starter kit challenge that I did. I think I did 7 coats on the sails, thinning the paint and putting it on. But it achieves a nice even finish. It also dries quick. So this is a counterintuitive thing. You thin a paint with water, it will dry more quickly. That's counterintuitive, right? You would think that a raw paint by itself would dry more quickly than one that you thin with water, but it doesn't. I mean, principally it's to do with the binder. Which effectively prevents, or not prevents, but retards evaporation. Whereas if a lot more of your paint is water, there's nothing to really stop it evaporating, if that makes sense. So yeah, thinner paint dries more quickly, to a point. Which is good if you're doing multiple coats, obviously, because you don't want to be hanging around forever. So yeah, I would tend to, draw your brush back like this. If you've only got a small brush like this, if you're using the flat of the brush and fairly dilute paint, again, you can eliminate a lot of the brush strokes, like so. See, that's a fairly even coat there. Not too much in the way of brush strokes, and those that are going this way. So again, I can get away with that. So again, if you need to block in stuff, you can do that, and then again, just finish by drawing over what you've already done in that same way, along with the airflow. It bears with all weathering, actually. You want to go with aircraft. You go in the direction of airflow or gravity, depending on how you're depicting your aircraft and what sort of weathering it is. Obviously, if it's weathering that's going to happen when your aircraft is parked outside, and then it wants to go with gravity, or if it's like oil drips and stuff, gravity, exhaust, and abrasive effects like you might get in like low level stuff in the desert and things, airflow. Okay, so stuff from the engine, stuff from gun ports, weathering should be airflow. Oil stains can be both, right? Because it can be oil that has leaked out, and then the aircraft taxis out and takes off, and that spreads that oil leak across in the direction of airflow. Or it can just be, as the aircraft is sitting on the ground, oil leaking out and running down the fuselage. I mean, hopefully you're not getting massive oil leaks. You know what I'm saying. I wouldn't get in a plane that had great big oil leaks down the engine. It's just like, yeah, that looks like the engine's going to explode as soon as I get up. If they put any stress on it, it looks like most of the oil cooling that thing is already gone. I don't want to put it onto full military power with no oil in the engine. Bad things can only result. Almost got all the Amiro on. There we go. Early War Zero in Amiro. That rhymes. I'm a poet and I didn't know it. As if. I'm not really, I don't really want this to be this color, but I just want to get rid of that horrible umbral lurid green. It's kind of offensive. I'm going to leave it in the cockpit as though it's Imperial Japanese Navy color. It's not, but it's I can pass it off as that. So if I was actually painting this aircraft, I would put another coat on after this. So to me, this is still not ready. But it's a paint meal, so I probably won't. Okay. Interestingly, I have two sets of decals here. Oh, okay. So I think it was, let's just open these just to give you guys a look. So different aircraft manufacturers and at different times of the war, there were different Hinamaru. So I think it was Nakajima that kept the white circles around them, whereas Mitsubishi didn't, I believe. So they weren't even consistent in the in how they applied their national markings. So. But again, quite useful from a historical point of view if you want to determine, when was an aircraft manufactured, or by whom. So, in no guesses on the deep green black and green black. D1, D2. I shall mix some D1 and D. That is, yeah. Okay, this is a nice simple mix. So standard official camouflage D1 over J3. So that is 1069, which is extra dark green. And to that, we are adding, this is a really nice simple mix. The reason I'm putting multiple in is because I want like volume of paint. Try and get these even because there's quite, the blue is a lot more fluid. So it's just a one-to-one mix of extra dark green and clear blue. And of course, water, which I almost forgot. So yeah, this is quite, I ended up with quite an unusual sort of set of colors for the Japanese. So you get quite a lot of use of clear blue is used in a lot of the recipes. I've also actually included the gloss varnish as one of the paints. So I'm actually only using 11 pigmented paints for these colours. And they do cover quite a large range as well. Now, I'm only going to do half of this because I want to do the other half in D2, because although D1 was the official color, it seems some Navy aircraft were already camouflaged in D2, particularly those like seaplanes designed for going over low level, over the sea. And it seems D2 may have been used as a substitute. Plus, of course, you have the vagaries of what manufacturers actually decided to do. So who knows? You know, you're in a pinch, you do whatever you can. So obviously that's only the first coat, but you can see very dark, deep green, and that cold green, that bluish green. And then let me quickly do the D2, just to give you a visual comparison. Which Calciprese is also 1069. 2 volumes of that. And this time we're going to add some more green to it. It's 1067 dark green. And then a colour which again features quite a lot in these mixes. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Yeah, half of the mixes here. And that is British khaki. Some water there. So yeah, you see deep black green. Sorry, deep green black is darker than green black. Now, some people have also said that different manufacturers use different, like prefer different colors. And you see, this is much more of a green. It's not quite as green as it looks here. It's because it's still wet. But that's often sort of cited as kind of Mitsubishi green. And then this more blue green is often cited as Nakajima green. So we put them together here. It's usually easier to compare colors directly once they're physically next to each other. You can see again, not quite how they look because they're still wet, although most Japanese colors were also glossy. So there's that as well. So again, having the gloss varnish as part of the set, I think, makes sense. I should have left a gap, shouldn't I, for the identification band, which I think ends where the cannons are. So both quite dark greens. That's see more green than the dark, almost bluish black of the J1. Yellow identification bands, of course, were only introduced later on in the war when it became important, when American aircraft started regularly invading Japanese airspace and or what they considered Japanese airspace at the time. And they didn't want to shoot their own fighters down. Which kind of parallels Germany, So there we go. You can get the difference, even though this one's not dry and that one's not double coated. Quickly slap on some J3 just to give you idea. Again, you can see it's a warmer grey. And just to give you a direct comparison, here is, let's have a look. Sky grey. You can see it's a lot, and sky grey is a relatively warm grey, but you can see how that is. There's a lot more yellow tone in it. Quite often you can only tell these things by comparison, though. Colour is a very perception-based thing. So when I put this on next to the green, right, let's do it the other side. It'll look quite neutral. Because what you're comparing to is the green and not the not another neutral grey. So this is that whole, you know, gold stroke blue dress thing. So that looks quite warm because you're comparing it to this silver visually and against the background of white here. But then if I bring it here to this, it doesn't. It looks more grey. So, you know, it's very contextual. The context in which you're viewing a colour alters your perception of what that colour is. Colour is an interesting kind of meeting point between biology, physics, and chemistry. So the physics is there is an absolute set of wavelengths that are being reflected by a pigment. Yeah, that doesn't change. That is set. That is a physical thing, and that is related to the chemistry of the pigments and the binders in the paint. And then biology comes in when those photons enter your eye and are interpreted by your brain. And that's the bit at which, you know, things start to come a little bit loose, because that's that word, right? Interpretation. Your brain isn't directly receiving those photons. They are being received by rods and cones in your eyes, converting them to electrical signals that your brain then tries to work out what they mean. So that is the it involves all three sciences, and it is not as simple as the physics of reflectance. I'm painting this in the ash grey before doing the identification yellow bands, just so it's got something to bite to a little better. Because the grey will provide a better neutral sort of base than the plastic. There we go. So as your standard as prescribed, what is as prescribed J1 over D3. That is sometimes how it ended up. D2 over J3, or D2 light color over J3. Then we got the cowling to do, which was blue-black, and identification yellow bands, which are a very orange yellow. Then you get the whole question of when does orange become yellow? Because again, that's not a definitive point, right? One person will look at an orange and say that's yellow, and again, it depends what you're comparing it to, what it's next to. If it's next to a red, it will look yellow. If it's next to a green like this, it'll look more yellow. If it's by itself, then your eye has to make other assumptions, other guesses. So believe it or not, the orange used by the Army and Navy was also is also a contentious color. Who would have thought it? I'm just trying to slap some color on this at the moment just to get this done. Needs more water. There we go. And of course, the more water you have in your mix, again, why using thinned paint is a good thing, is the water won't support the paint marks in the same way that the binder in your paint will. So more coats of thinner paint will give you less visible paint marks, paint lines, which is generally thought of as a good thing. But again, those brush marks that I am brushing in direction of airflow, so that if there are any, they are going to be in that flow and we can disguise them. So yeah, that's kind of your sort of, let's call it Mitsubishi green. That's your kind of Nakajima green. So you can see, just compared to the white, that reads as and without, I'll cover the cowling up. It reads as fairly grey. Bring this in, it looks more grey. So here you can kind of see the warmth in it because you're against the white, and you bring in something like this, and by contrast, it looks quite grey. It looks more neutral now. So it's an interesting exercise to look at different colours with different things next to them. The world is a lie. All right, chaps. I think I'm going to stop there. Thank you very much for joining me and just watching me potter about on a Sunday afternoon, making a zero and making up some Japanese colours, talking about Aotaki and Japanese perception of blue and green and other pieces. Always good to have you come on and have a look at what I'm pushing plastic about the bench. I hope to see you on the Tuesday talk, and I will be releasing those videos, the full build videos on the Apollo and the SLS Artemis during the next week as well. So thank you, guys. I'm going to go and reheat a curry and probably have a beer. So I hope you have a very pleasant evening doing similar or whatever you choose to do, and I'll catch you on the next one. Okay, cheers now, guys.